Technology rarely announces itself as a witness. It sits quietly in our pockets, on our tables, beside our beds, absorbing the rhythms of our lives without commentary or judgment. We touch it casually, often absent-mindedly, believing it to be a neutral tool that serves us when called upon and disappears when not. Yet beneath this simplicity lies a profound reality. Everyday devices are not passive objects. They are record keepers, pattern observers, and at times, unintended truth-tellers. They reveal not through intention, but through accumulation, not through accusation, but through evidence. What makes technology uniquely powerful in this role is that it does not rely on memory, emotion, or narrative. Human beings forget, distort, soften, exaggerate, or selectively recall. We tell stories about ourselves and others that help us cope, belong, or feel safe. Technology does none of this. It logs what happens, when it happens, how often it happens, and under what conditions. It does not care why. It simply records. And it is precisely this indifference that gives it its unsettling honesty. Many people assume that truth is something spoken, confessed, or revealed through confrontation. But in modern life, truth often appears indirectly, through patterns rather than statements. A location history that contradicts a story, a deleted message that leaves a trace, a permission setting that suggests access never discussed. These are not dramatic revelations in themselves, they are fragments. But when fragments repeat, they begin to speak. Technology exposes behavior not by declaring intent, but by showing consistency. And consistency is difficult to argue with. A single unexplained event can be dismissed as coincidence. Repeated events form a narrative that does not depend on persuasion. This is why technology feels threatening when it reveals something uncomfortable. It bypasses charisma, authority, and emotional appeal. It does not negotiate. What is particularly educational about this is how often technology reveals not malicious acts, but misalignments between what people say and what they do. Someone may genuinely believe they are honest, caring, respectful, or faithful, while their digital patterns quietly suggest otherwise. This does not automatically make them villains, it makes them human. But it also makes technology a mirror that reflects behavior more accurately than self-perception often can. The danger lies not in the mirror itself, but in how unprepared we are to look into it. Most people interact with technology intuitively, not intentionally. They tap allow without reading, they share access without understanding scope, they connect devices without considering consequences. This lack of awareness creates an environment where technology can reveal truths not because it is invasive, but because boundaries were never consciously set. In this sense, technology does not betray us, it simply honors the permissions we forgot we gave. This is an important educational shift. Instead of framing technology as something that suddenly exposes secrets, it is more accurate to understand it as something that steadily accumulates data until patterns become undeniable. The truth was not hidden and then discovered. It was quietly documented all along. Another crucial lesson is that technology does not expose only individuals, it exposes dynamics. Power relationships, control mechanisms, dependency patterns, all of these leave digital footprints. Who has access to whose accounts? Who monitors and who is monitored? Who insists on transparency and who avoids it? These dynamics are often emotionally complex and difficult to articulate in conversation, but technology translates them into observable behavior. For example, constant location tracking might be framed verbally as concern or care, but when viewed technologically, it becomes a pattern of surveillance. Repeated password requests might be explained as forgetfulness, but digitally, they appear as persistent access attempts. Technology strips away the emotional justification and presents the behavior in its raw form. This can be deeply uncomfortable, especially when intentions and impacts do not align. Yet discomfort is not the same as harm. Education teaches us to sit with discomfort long enough to learn from it. One of the most misunderstood aspects of technology as a truth teller is the belief that it creates problems rather than reveals them. People often say, "Everything was fine until the phone showed this," or "Nothing was wrong until someone checked the device." This logic confuses ignorance with peace. The absence of awareness is not the absence of reality. Technology simply reduces the space in which denial can comfortably exist. This is why the reaction to technological truth often involves anger directed at the device, the app, or the person who noticed the pattern. It feels easier to blame the messenger than to examine the message. But educational maturity requires a different approach. Instead of asking, "Why did this come to light?" the more useful question is, what does this pattern teach us about behavior, boundaries, and responsibility? Technology also challenges the idea that truth must be intentional to be valid. Many digital revelations occur accidentally: a phone taken for repair, a shared tablet, a synced account. These moments feel intrusive not because they are malicious, but because they bypass our carefully managed narratives. They show us something we did not prepare to explain. This raises an ethical responsibility on the part of the observer. Just because technology can reveal something does not mean it should be used recklessly. Education here is not only about literacy, but about restraint. Seeing a pattern does not require immediate confrontation. Discovering information does not obligate instant disclosure. Wisdom lies in deciding what to do with truth, not just in possessing it. Technology teaches this lesson quietly but firmly. Information without regulation creates chaos. Information with discernment creates safety. Another dimension worth understanding is how technology reveals not only harmful patterns, but also neglected ones. It shows who reaches out and who never does, who makes time and who postpones indefinitely, who responds promptly and who disappears. These are not dramatic betrayals, but subtle truths about priority and presence. In relationships, these truths are often felt emotionally but difficult to articulate. Technology gives them form. However, this clarity can be double-edged. When people rely solely on technology to validate feelings, they risk reducing complex human behavior to data points. Education requires balance. Technology can reveal patterns, but it cannot explain motivations. It can show frequency but not context. It can highlight inconsistency but not internal conflict. Understanding truth fully still requires empathy and dialogue. This is why technology should be seen as a starting point for inquiry, not a final judgment. Perhaps the most powerful educational insight is how technology democratizes truth. In the past, truth often depended on authority, credibility, or social power. Those who spoke convincingly were believed. Those without voice were doubted. Technology levels this field by allowing patterns to speak regardless of status. A log does not care who you are. A timestamp does not adjust itself for reputation. This can feel threatening to those accustomed to controlling narratives, but liberating to those who have been doubted. Yet even this democratization requires responsibility. Access to truth does not automatically confer wisdom. Knowing something does not mean knowing how to respond to it. This is where education must go beyond skills and into ethics. Technology teaches us that truth is rarely a single moment. It is cumulative. It builds quietly, often invisibly, until it reaches a point where it can no longer be ignored. By the time it is noticed, it has usually been present for a long time. This reframes discovery not as shock, but as delayed awareness. In this way, technology is less like a spotlight and more like sediment. Layer upon layer, day after day, it settles. When disturbed, it reveals a shape that was always forming. Understanding this changes how we relate to both technology and truth. It encourages proactive awareness rather than reactive fear. It invites us to ask better questions before problems arise. Who has access? What is being recorded? What patterns are forming without our attention? These questions are not paranoid. They are preventative. Education also reminds us that technology does not discriminate between positive and negative behavior. It records care as faithfully as it records control. It documents consistency as clearly as it exposes neglect. For those willing to look, it can validate trust just as much as it challenges it. The issue is not that technology tells the truth, but that we selectively engage with the truths we are ready to face. Ultimately, technology as an unintended truth-teller teaches a humbling lesson. We are always more observable than we think. Our actions leave traces, even when our words are careful. This does not mean we should live in fear of being exposed. It means we should live with greater alignment between intention and behavior. When actions and values align, technology poses no threat. When they diverge, technology does not create the gap, it reveals it. The educational invitation, then, is not to mistrust technology, but to use it as feedback. Not as a weapon, but as information. Not as proof of guilt, but as a prompt for reflection. Truth does not always arrive with drama. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through a device doing exactly what it was designed to do. Remember, listening to warnings without panic is a skill that is rarely taught explicitly, yet it is one of the most valuable capacities a person can develop in a world that constantly delivers signals, alerts, and cautionary advice. From childhood, many of us are conditioned to respond to warnings with immediate reaction. Stop, run, hide, call for help. But rarely are we taught to differentiate between urgency that requires instant physical action and urgency that requires deliberate mental processing. This distinction is subtle but critical. The difference between panic and calm attention often determines whether a situation is managed effectively or escalates unnecessarily. Warnings arrive in many forms: verbal, written, technological, emotional, and social. Some are loud and unmistakable: smoke alarms, sirens, urgent phone calls, while others are quieter, almost imperceptible: an uneasy tone in someone's voice, an unusual pattern in a digital notification, or the subtle recommendation of a professional. In modern life, the latter forms are increasingly common, and they demand a different type of response. They are not emergencies in the immediate physical sense, yet ignoring them can have profound consequences. Learning to listen without panic begins with cultivating awareness that not all alerts are created equal. The first step in listening without panic is understanding the nature of the warning itself. Every warning contains two layers: the content of the message and the context of the message. Content refers to the literal information being communicated, what is happening, what might happen, and what is observed. Context refers to the circumstances surrounding the warning: who is issuing it, why it is being issued, how credible it is, and how it relates to your specific situation. Many mistakes in responding to warnings occur because people attend to content alone without considering context. For example, a sudden alert from a device might provoke anxiety if one focuses on the potential risk alone. But evaluating the context, whether the alert is a system glitch, whether the source is trustworthy, and whether immediate action is necessary, often mitigates panic and clarifies the appropriate response. Calm observation is the second crucial skill. When a warning arrives, there is an instinctive urge to act first and process later. This impulse is rooted in the evolutionary fight-or-flight response, which has historically saved lives in situations of immediate physical danger. However, in contemporary life, many warnings require more cognitive than physical action. A calm observer does not suppress the urgency of a warning. Instead, they allow it to sharpen focus while resisting the urge for immediate reaction. This requires a mental pause, a brief moment to breathe, to assess, and to collect information. In practice, calm observation might mean taking a few seconds to read all details of an alert, noting the source, and mentally mapping the potential outcomes before deciding what to do next. Verification is the third essential element. Warnings, even when genuine, are only as useful as the information they convey. Acting on incomplete, inaccurate, or misleading information can exacerbate danger rather than prevent it. Verification involves gathering additional evidence, consulting reliable sources, and assessing the credibility of the warning. For example, if a professional advises immediate action regarding digital security, such as a phone potentially being compromised, verification might involve asking clarifying questions, checking the device for unusual activity, or seeking a second opinion from another professional. Verification does not delay action unnecessarily. It ensures that any response is informed and proportionate to the actual risk. Thoughtful action follows naturally from calm observation and verification. The goal is not to suppress urgency, but to channel it effectively. Thoughtful action is deliberate, strategic, and responsive, rather than impulsive or reactive. It balances speed with accuracy, ensuring that any measures taken are appropriate to the level of risk. For example, receiving a warning about potential digital intrusion should not trigger immediate confrontation or alarm that could escalate conflict. Instead, thoughtful action might involve securing accounts, adjusting privacy settings, temporarily distancing from potentially risky environments, and planning further steps based on the information verified. Each action is measured, purposeful, and oriented toward protection rather than panic. Panic, in contrast, undermines clarity and effectiveness. When panic dominates, perception narrows, critical thinking diminishes, and decisions are often based on fear rather than rational assessment. People in panic mode are more likely to overreact, misinterpret signals, or take steps that inadvertently create harm. In familial or social contexts, panic can amplify tension, erode trust, and produce unnecessary confrontation. Listening without panic allows the urgency of the warning to be honored while maintaining control over one's response, ensuring that the outcome reflects intelligence and discernment rather than fear. Another dimension of listening without panic is emotional regulation. Warnings often trigger anxiety precisely because they challenge our assumptions of safety and predictability. Emotional regulation involves recognizing the physiological and psychological signs of fear, racing heartbeat, shallow breathing, intrusive thoughts, and applying techniques to maintain composure. Breathing exercises, grounding techniques, and structured decision-making processes are practical tools for ensuring that emotional response does not override rational thought. By regulating emotions, individuals maintain the cognitive space necessary to interpret warnings accurately and to respond effectively. Listening without panic also requires detachment from immediate judgment. When we receive urgent advice, there is often a temptation to assign blame or imagine worst-case scenarios. This tendency, while natural, can cloud judgment. Instead, adopting a stance of observation, curiosity, and patience allows the warning to be evaluated on its merits, rather than through the lens of fear or suspicion. For example, a warning about potential surveillance does not automatically imply malice. It indicates a situation that requires careful attention, verification, and protective measures. Approaching warnings with curiosity rather than panic transforms them from sources of stress into opportunities for learning, awareness, and preparedness. Education in this area emphasizes the importance of structured response protocols. In both personal and professional life, establishing clear procedures for handling warnings can reduce panic and enhance effectiveness. These protocols might include checklists for verification, designated contacts for consultation, or pre-planned steps for immediate protection. When individuals know in advance how they will respond, urgency becomes manageable rather than paralyzing. Predictable and rehearsed procedures convert fear into competence. The skill of listening without panic is also relational. Warnings rarely exist in isolation. They often involve others, family members, colleagues, professionals, or authorities. Effective listening requires clear communication and coordination. Sharing warnings responsibly, consulting relevant parties, and maintaining composure in collective decision-making ensures that urgency does not translate into chaos. In family settings, for example, calmly explaining a situation and outlining protective measures fosters trust and cooperation rather than fear and conflict. A critical insight is that listening without panic does not mean inaction. It does not imply passivity, denial, or avoidance. Rather, it is a deliberate mode of engagement that balances attention, assessment, and response. Urgent advice carries implicit instruction: act, but act wisely. Panic is the distortion that replaces wisdom with impulsivity. Calm observation, verification, and thoughtful action Honor the spirit of the warning without being enslaved by it. Technology illustrates this principle vividly. Many urgent alerts, notifications of unusual account activity, digital breaches, or hardware issues can provoke immediate anxiety. The natural response is to react impulsively, to confront, to accuse, or to shut down systems in a flurry of fear. Yet the most effective response combines awareness with restraint, checking the alert, understanding its specifics, consulting experts if necessary, and then implementing a measured plan exemplifies listening without panic. Technology is a constant source of warnings, and mastering our response to these alerts translates into broader life skills for handling uncertainty and risk. Listening without panic is also about temporal perspective. Urgent advice often creates the illusion that immediate action is the only valid option. While some emergencies demand instant physical intervention, many warnings, especially in social, relational, or digital contexts, benefit from short pauses, observation, and planning. Developing the ability to discern urgency that requires immediate physical action from urgency that benefits from thoughtful deliberation is a mark of maturity and intelligence. Finally, the practice of listening without panic cultivates resilience. Every warning navigated calmly strengthens confidence in one's ability to handle future uncertainty. Each experience reinforces the capacity to remain composed, verify information, and act thoughtfully, creating a positive feedback loop that enhances decision-making under stress. Over time, individuals internalize this skill, making them less susceptible to fear-driven responses and more capable of transforming urgency into strategic, protective, and constructive action. In essence, the lesson is simple but profound. Warnings are signals, not verdicts. Advice is a guide, not a command to panic. Urgent advice should sharpen perception, not cloud judgment. It should motivate action, not fear. It should encourage learning, verification, and measured response, rather than reactive confrontation. Mastering the art of listening without panic transforms moments of potential crisis into opportunities for clarity, safety, and thoughtful engagement. It is not a passive skill, but an active, disciplined, and deeply human one that cultivates both awareness and wisdom in the face of uncertainty. By internalizing this approach, individuals learn to navigate life's unpredictable challenges with composure. Every alert, every caution, every urgent message becomes a teacher rather than a threat. Panic diminishes agency, but calm observation, verification, and thoughtful action enhance it. Listening without panic is not only a practical skill, it is an educational and ethical principle that empowers individuals to respond to warnings in ways that protect themselves, respect others, and uphold clarity and rationality in moments when fear might otherwise dominate. The difference between reacting and responding, between fear and awareness, is cultivated through practice. Over time, listening to warnings without panic becomes second nature, allowing individuals to move through life with both alertness and composure, ready to act with intelligence and restraint, no matter the urgency of the advice received. Boundaries are among the most essential yet often misunderstood tools for preserving well-being, relationships, and personal safety. In a world where interactions are constant and demands on our attention are relentless, the ability to establish and maintain boundaries is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Yet many people conflate boundaries with confrontation or accusation. They fear that setting limits will be interpreted as mistrust, hostility, or rejection. This misunderstanding obscures a fundamental truth. Boundaries are not inherently punitive, they are protective. They are statements of need, clarity, and safety, not declarations of blame or judgment. To understand boundaries as acts of protection, it is helpful to recognize the distinction between safety and judgment. Safety is proactive. It involves anticipating risk, maintaining integrity, and creating conditions where well-being is preserved. Judgment, by contrast, is reactive. It evaluates, assigns blame, and often escalates conflict. Boundaries exist in the realm of safety. They are preventive measures, designed to prevent harm before it occurs, or to limit exposure to environments, behaviors, or influences that could compromise emotional, physical, or psychological stability. The critical insight is that one can establish safety without immediately ascribing fault or intention. For instance, consider a scenario in which a person becomes aware of a potential threat, whether a digital intrusion, a toxic relationship pattern, or a manipulative influence. The instinctive human response is often to confront the perceived wrongdoer, to demand explanations, assign blame, or seek immediate restitution. While confrontation may sometimes be appropriate, it is not the first step in ensuring safety. Establishing boundaries, removing oneself from immediate exposure, securing personal information, or creating structured limits on contact is the foundational act that preserves integrity. Boundaries do not accuse, they simply define what is acceptable, safe, and manageable. Boundaries function as a form of self-respect and self-preservation. They articulate limits in a clear and intentional way. When someone sets a boundary, they are effectively communicating, "This is my space, my responsibility, and my right to protect myself." The focus is on the individual's needs and well-being, not on criticizing or punishing others. For example, in family or workplace situations, one might limit access to personal devices, set specific hours for communication, or designate private spaces. These measures are not accusatory, they are structural safeguards that maintain dignity, clarity, and emotional balance. An important educational insight is that boundaries require clarity and consistency. Vague or inconsistent boundaries invite confusion and reduce their protective power. Saying, "I don't want to discuss this right now," is much more effective than a passive withdrawal or ambiguous gesture. Clear boundaries reduce the risk of misinterpretation and prevent escalation. They allow others to understand the framework within which interactions are safe, ethical, and respectful. Clarity is not judgment. It is a tool for reducing ambiguity and fostering mutual understanding. Distance is another crucial aspect of protective boundaries. Physical, emotional, and digital distances can be established to prevent harm or to create space for thoughtful decision-making. Distance does not signify hostility, it signifies prudence. In situations where safety may be compromised, maintaining distance allows time for assessment, verification, and preparation. For example, stepping back from a heated confrontation, limiting access to personal accounts, or pausing interactions that feel manipulative does not label anyone as wrong. Instead, it prioritizes protection while preserving the opportunity for dialogue or resolution when circumstances allow. Boundaries also function as educational tools. They teach others what is acceptable and what is not through accusation, but through demonstration. When individuals enforce boundaries consistently, they communicate standards of respect and care without resorting to verbal reprimand. Over time, this creates environments where predictable patterns of behavior emerge, reducing the likelihood of repeated harm. This principle applies to parenting, workplace management, personal relationships, and digital interactions alike. Boundaries are not reactive punishments, they are proactive lessons in responsibility and awareness. A subtle but important dimension of boundaries as protection is their role in emotional regulation. Human relationships are complex and fraught with potential for conflict, misunderstanding, and hurt. When individuals fail to establish boundaries, they expose themselves to emotional overload, manipulation, and chronic stress. Protective boundaries provide a buffer against these risks. They allow for measured response rather than impulsive reaction. By creating structural limits, such as timeouts during heated exchanges, digital detox periods, or selective sharing of sensitive information, individuals maintain emotional equilibrium while safeguarding relationships from unnecessary harm. It is also essential to recognize that boundaries are inherently personal. What constitutes a protective boundary for one individual may differ for another. This is not a matter of judgment, it is a matter of context, needs, and lived experience. Each person must assess their own vulnerabilities, priorities, and limits to establish boundaries that effectively safeguard well-being. Imposing boundaries on others or expecting uniformity in response can create tension, but maintaining personal boundaries remains both valid and necessary. Boundaries are personal acts of protection, not societal tests or moral judgments. Boundaries gain additional significance when navigating uncertainty or potential danger, when confronted with a situation where risk is suspected but not fully understood, such as the possibility of surveillance, manipulation, or betrayal. Establishing clear boundaries is the safest initial response. Immediate accusations can escalate conflict, damage trust, or provoke retaliation. Protective boundaries, on the other hand, secure one's position, allow time for gathering information, and maintain options for future action. They create a framework in which thoughtful decisions can be made, grounded in safety rather than fear. A key challenge in implementing protective boundaries is overcoming the perception that they signal mistrust or rejection. Many people hesitate to enforce limits because they worry about offending others or being misunderstood. Education emphasizes that boundaries are not statements about the character, motives, or integrity of others. They are reflections of one's own needs and responsibilities. Just as a fence does not accuse a neighbor of wrongdoing, but simply delineates property lines, boundaries delineate personal space, agency, and safety. This perspective reframes boundaries from confrontation to self-care. Consistency is essential in reinforcing boundaries as protective, not accusatory. Inconsistent enforcement undermines credibility and diminishes their protective function. If boundaries are established only intermittently or reactively, they risk being perceived as arbitrary or punitive. Conversely, consistent, calm, and clear application communicates stability, predictability, and control. It signals that boundaries are a standard practice for safety and respect, not a tool for emotional retribution. Boundaries also facilitate reflection and measured judgment. By creating space between oneself and potential harm, boundaries allow time for observation, verification, and understanding. They enable individuals to assess situations without the distortion of immediate fear or reactive emotion. When a boundary is in place, decisions are made from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. Safety becomes the priority, and judgment can follow thoughtfully rather than impulsively. In addition, protective boundaries nurture empowerment. They communicate that the individual is the primary steward of their own well-being and that it is acceptable to prioritize safety over appeasement. Empowerment does not require confrontation. It requires clarity about needs and limits. By asserting protective boundaries, individuals cultivate confidence in their ability to navigate complex interpersonal, social, and digital landscapes without sacrificing integrity or safety. Protective boundaries are also dynamic. They evolve with context, knowledge, and experience. What is necessary for safety in one moment may change in another. Recognizing this fluidity prevents boundaries from being perceived as rigid or punitive. Instead, they are adaptive structures, responsive to emerging information and shifting circumstances. This flexibility underscores their role as tools of protection, not instruments of accusation. Furthermore, boundaries model responsible behavior for others. When children, colleagues, or family members observe clear, calm, and consistent boundaries, they learn how to navigate relationships with respect and awareness. Boundaries educate through example, demonstrating that personal space, consent, and responsibility are fundamental components of healthy interaction. This modeling effect reinforces the protective purpose of boundaries across generations and social contexts. Finally, boundaries as acts of protection honor the principle that safety precedes judgment. Immediate accusation often escalates conflict and compromises well-being. Protective boundaries, in contrast, secure personal integrity while preserving the opportunity for thoughtful assessment and resolution. They ensure that individuals maintain control over their circumstances, respond deliberately rather than reactively, and create conditions for trust, clarity, and informed decision-making to flourish. Boundaries are not defensive walls erected in anger, they are carefully constructed measures of care, clarity, and preservation. They communicate priorities without judgment, delineate limits without hostility, and create space for reflection and safe action. Recognizing danger, taking steps to protect oneself, and maintaining distance do not require assigning blame. They require wisdom, foresight, and intentionality. In essence, boundaries teach a profound lesson. Safety is not achieved through accusation or confrontation, but through intentional structure, clarity, and restraint. They are proactive expressions of responsibility, not reactive expressions of anger. They embody the understanding that protection comes first, and judgment can follow thoughtfully once circumstances are secure. By internalizing this principle, individuals cultivate resilience, preserve integrity, and navigate complex relationships and uncertain environments with discernment, confidence, and calm authority. Protective boundaries transform moments of potential harm into opportunities for reflection and preparation. They shift the focus from assigning fault to preserving safety. They remind us that well-being is a priority and that distance, clarity, and limits are acts of wisdom rather than acts of accusation. By consistently applying this understanding, individuals create environments where safety, dignity, and informed judgment coexist, enabling confident, responsible, and resilient engagement with the world around them. Wisdom lies in response, not revelation. This principle is deceptively simple in phrasing but profoundly complex in application. In life, we are constantly confronted with information, some of it mundane, some of it deeply unsettling. The human instinct, when faced with a disturbing truth, is often to react immediately, to confront, accuse, expose, or correct. Yet the measure of wisdom is not how quickly or passionately one reacts to what is revealed, but how deliberately and thoughtfully one chooses to respond. Integrity, stability, and moral clarity are expressed not in the act of uncovering information, but in the quality of action that follows. Discovering a disturbing truth can be disorienting. It shakes assumptions, challenges trust, and often evokes intense emotional responses such as fear, anger, or betrayal. In these moments, it is easy to conflate knowledge with obligation. Many believe that learning a fact imposes a duty to act immediately and decisively, sometimes at the expense of strategy, safety, or dignity. This conflation is one of the most common traps in ethical decision-making. Wisdom requires resisting the impulse to equate revelation with immediate action, and instead recognizing that the true test of character lies in how one manages the consequences of that knowledge. Response requires assessment. Every disturbing truth exists within a context: social, emotional, legal, and practical. Jumping to action without evaluating these dimensions can create additional harm. For instance, in relationships, uncovering evidence of a partner's deception or misbehavior might generate a strong desire to confront or expose. However, without a thoughtful assessment of context, this response can escalate conflict, damage relationships irreversibly, or put one at risk. True wisdom involves considering the consequences of every potential course of action before choosing how to proceed. This principle is particularly relevant in situations where lives, dignity, or long-term stability are at stake. For example, learning that someone close is in danger, that a child or family member is being manipulated, or that a professional environment is unsafe requires more than emotional reaction. It requires measured action. Protecting lives and preserving stability often demands subtlety, discretion, and a focus on outcomes rather than immediate justice. Reacting impulsively may satisfy short-term moral instincts but compromise long-term well-being. Therefore, wisdom manifests in deliberate, careful, and proportionate responses that prioritize protection over exposure. Another important dimension is the understanding that revelation is inherently neutral. Information by itself does not carry moral weight. It is the interpretation and subsequent action that imbue it with ethical significance. A disturbing truth is neither virtuous nor sinful until it is acted upon. The discovery of a secret, a betrayal, or an irregularity only becomes ethically meaningful when the individual chooses how to handle it. This is why integrity is demonstrated not by what one learns, but by how one responds. The choices, strategies, and boundaries established following the revelation define ethical character. The role of emotional regulation cannot be overstated in this process. Disturbing truths often trigger intense emotions, shock, anger, guilt, or fear, that can cloud judgment and provoke rash action. Responding wisely requires the capacity to regulate these emotions, to acknowledge them without being dominated by them. This involves creating mental space to breathe, reflect, and evaluate options. By doing so, individuals avoid decisions dictated solely by reaction and instead cultivate responses aligned with long-term values and objectives. Patience is an essential element of response-driven wisdom. In many cases, the best course of action is not immediate disclosure or confrontation. There are circumstances in which waiting, observing, or gathering more information before acting is not only prudent but necessary. Patience allows for careful verification, reduces the risk of misinterpretation, and enables more strategic decision-making. Acting too hastily, even with good intentions, can lead to unintended consequences that undermine the very integrity and protection one seeks to uphold. Boundaries often serve as the bridge between revelation and response. When a disturbing truth emerges, establishing clear boundaries, physical, emotional, or social, provides the space needed to act wisely. Boundaries are not barriers to resolution. They are protective measures that ensure any response is controlled, deliberate, and constructive. For example, temporarily limiting access to sensitive information, distancing from a harmful influence, or creating secure environments for vulnerable individuals allows for decisions that prioritize long-term safety and dignity. Boundaries translate awareness into actionable protection without resorting to impulsive confrontation. An essential aspect of responding wisely is considering the broader impact of one's actions. Disturbing truths rarely exist in isolation. They often involve multiple people, complex relationships, and potential ripple effects. A response that satisfies immediate moral or emotional instincts may inadvertently harm others or destabilize systems in ways that were not intended. For instance, exposing a betrayal without considering timing, context, or collateral consequences can devastate relationships, reputations, or community structures. Wisdom requires anticipating these effects, weighing potential outcomes, and choosing a response that balances truth with preservation. Responsibility is central to this approach. When a person becomes aware of a truth that could have serious consequences, they inherit the responsibility to manage that knowledge ethically. This does not mean assuming blame for the actions of others, nor does it mean controlling situations beyond one's capacity. Rather, it involves taking ownership of one's own conduct in response to what is known, how one exercises judgment, sets boundaries, communicates information, and prioritizes protection. All of these define the integrity of the response. Discretion is closely linked to wisdom in response. Not every truth needs immediate disclosure to everyone involved. Sometimes sharing a disturbing truth indiscriminately can create panic, conflict, or unnecessary exposure. Strategic discretion allows for selective communication, ensuring that information reaches the right people, in the right context, and at the right time. This principle is particularly important in situations involving personal privacy, professional responsibility, or family dynamics. Discretion is not secrecy for self-interest. It is a measured approach that aligns action with ethical protection and long-term stability. Reflection is another vital component. A wise response often emerges through introspection, analysis, and critical thinking. Reflecting on motives, potential consequences, ethical frameworks, and desired outcomes allows for more balanced and effective action. This reflection transforms a raw emotional reaction into a calculated, principled choice. It ensures that the response addresses the core issue rather than being swayed by transient feelings, external pressures, or societal expectations. Empathy also plays a significant role in the wisdom of response. Understanding the perspectives, vulnerabilities, and potential consequences for others involved helps shape actions that are not only protective, but compassionate. Responding to disturbing truths with empathy ensures that dignity is preserved, even in difficult circumstances. It balances the imperative to act with the ethical responsibility to minimize harm and maintain humanity within challenging situations. Another crucial dimension of response-oriented wisdom is adaptability. Situations evolve, and new information often emerges after an initial revelation. A wise individual remains flexible, adjusting strategies as additional facts become available. Adaptability prevents rigid reactions that might be harmful or counterproductive. It allows responses to remain aligned with the overarching goal of protection, dignity, and stability, even as circumstances shift. Education and preparation enhance the capacity for wise responses. Individuals who cultivate knowledge, develop critical thinking, and practice problem-solving are better equipped to manage disturbing truths. Skills such as verifying information, assessing risks, setting boundaries, and communicating effectively increase the likelihood that responses will be measured, strategic, and ethical. In this sense, wisdom is not purely innate, it is cultivated through intentional learning, reflection, and experience. Courage is intertwined with wisdom in response. It takes bravery to withhold immediate confrontation, to resist emotional impulses, and to act strategically in the face of discomfort or uncertainty. Courage ensures that the response is grounded not in avoidance or fear, but in principled decision-making. It allows individuals to protect others, maintain dignity, and secure stability even when the path is complex or counterintuitive. Ultimately, what defines integrity in moments of revelation is the alignment between action and principle. Knowledge alone does not confer moral authority, behavior does. Integrity is demonstrated by responses that prioritize well-being, safety, and ethical responsibility over impulse, drama, or temporary satisfaction. Choosing how to act with foresight and care distinguishes individuals who merely witness truth from those who embody wisdom. Wisdom also recognizes the difference between control and influence. A disturbing truth may involve factors beyond one's control, yet the individual retains influence over their response. Focusing on what can be influenced, setting boundaries, seeking guidance, securing safety, communicating effectively, transforms passive awareness into proactive management. Attempting to control every element of a complex situation often leads to frustration and reactive behavior, whereas acting from influence allows for measured, constructive responses that honor integrity. Long-term stability is a hallmark of wise response. Short-term revelations often provoke immediate emotional turbulence, but actions guided by strategy, discretion, and ethics maintain continuity, preserve relationships, and prevent unnecessary disruption. Responding wisely ensures that decisions made in the heat of awareness do not create permanent harm or irreversible consequences. Stability is maintained not by ignoring disturbing truths, but by managing their implications thoughtfully and deliberately. In practice, responding wisely may involve multiple stages: securing safety, verifying information, consulting trusted advisors, establishing boundaries, planning communication, and executing measured actions. Each stage reflects the principle that response, not revelation, defines integrity. The initial discovery is merely a signal. The meaningful work occurs in the deliberate, ethical, and strategic choices that follow. In conclusion, wisdom is demonstrated not by what is discovered, but by how one responds. Disturbing truths challenge assumptions, provoke emotion, and demand action. Yet it is the quality of the response that defines moral and ethical character. Integrity, protection of dignity, safeguarding of lives, and maintenance of long-term stability all stem from deliberate, thoughtful action rather than the mere act of uncovering information. Responding wisely transforms revelation from a potential source of chaos into an opportunity for principled action. It prioritizes safety over retribution, strategy over impulse, and ethical responsibility over emotional reaction. The individual who masters this approach exercises discernment, patience, courage, and reflection, ensuring that every choice made in the face of unsettling knowledge upholds integrity, preserves relationships, and protects both immediate and long-term well-being. In essence, revelation is only the beginning. Wisdom, integrity, and ethical strength are revealed in the response, the deliberate, thoughtful, and measured actions that follow. What defines a person's character is not the truth they encounter, but the choices they make in navigating it with clarity, responsibility, and care. It is in these responses, not in the act of discovery, that true moral and practical wisdom is found.